For more than 200 years, this site has served as a meeting point and a centre for fine hospitality. It is perhaps fitting that the Lloyd Erskine Sandyford Centre, now occupying this historic location, is today celebrated as the premier venue for conferences, conventions and events, and for fulfilling a pivotal role in shaping the island's development and enhancing its international reputation.
Welcome to A Pillar of Progress, the story of the Lloyd Erskine Sandyford Centre, where we present the narrative of a location that was destined to be a centre of warm hospitality for our people and the world. My name is Sherwood McCaskey. I'm pleased that you have joined me. In this first installment, we will explore the rich history and the architecture and the first major activities that took place within these walls. We will understand how this iconic institution continues to inspire innovation, foster community, and drive progress here in Barbados. Historian and author Dr. Henderson Carter is patiently waiting on the inside of the centre. With a sense of duty, Dr. Carter contextualizes this fascinating history. Dr. Carter?
The Lloyd Erskine Sandyford Centre is arguably Barbados's most iconic conference centre. It is a large conference centre, 164,000 square feet of space, tremendous. But it has a long and, I would say, illustrious history. So it starts in the 1800s, around 1819, where, according to Professor Woodville Marshall, there's a first notation of a villa called Sherborne House. And according to Professor Marshall, that word Sherborne is a transfer name from Britain, transferred from Dorset. And it's interesting to understand the importance of location. Sherborne was located to the west of Haggett Hall Plantation, over 300 acres. To the south is the Pine Plantation, okay? Another 200 acres or so. To the north, if you were to look out to my left, you see News Plantation. And on my left as well, a main road, what we call the St. Philip Main Road, stretching all the way from St. Philip into Bridgetown. And in 1838, we see there's an ad in the Barbadian newspaper advertising the sale of Sherborne. This ad was put out there by one of its owners, George Clinton, a merchant, and he's advertising the sale of this great house. We don't actually call Sherborne a great house. We just call it a townhouse because it was not in a plantation setting. Okay? So while you have the Haggett Hall House and the Pine Great House and Wildy Great House in a plantation setting, this is what we may describe as an urban house or urban townhouse. And there's some of them around Barbados. But Sherborne stands out because in 1838, Sherborne sat on 7 acres of land. 7 acres of land. When it was described in the newspaper, it said it had a very beautiful view of the sea and close to a road leading to Bridgetown. It talks about its flower gardens. Sherborne, at that stage, had 5 bedrooms. It had a drawing room, yes, a drawing room, 30 by 17 feet. Okay? a living room as well, a kitchen, and a breakfast area. Imagine a breakfast area separated from the drawing room and the living room, and you really have a big townhouse. In addition to that, there were 3 small quarters for servants, so that the servants who give service to the great house, or I kept saying the great house, but to the townhouse, they had their servants' room close by. You also had the quarters for the animals, the sheds, etc. And generally speaking, when we look at the history of the ownership of Sherborne, we see it being owned by the merchants of Bridgetown. And there's one particular merchant that I found, a merchant by the name of James Roberts. And James Roberts, I suspect, is the same J.C. Roberts who started Roberts Manufacturing in his backyard in the 1930s. Not too far from here, just going down Government Hill. So merchants, therefore, were very important in this community. Sometimes we think of planters, but we need to look at the merchant class in Barbados to create a townhouse that people could visit, people could sleep, and people could, have recreation in this townhouse. And I want to mention recreation because this is the beginning of a center that would provide recreation for Barbadians of all walks of life. Today, of course, it is a graduation center, a conference center, but back in the 1800s, you have a townhouse or villa providing recreation for Barbadians, and it would be mainly for white Barbadians, for colored Barbadians, but that is where it starts. So when we talk about the history of Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Center, we start with that townhouse located on the same spot. We suspect that it was to the west, near another great house, Ilara Court. So in the colonial period, therefore, Sherborne served as a recreation center. It served as a center where merchants could reside.
Martin King, who lives here at Newlands, has been a neighbour of the centre for many years. He was well acquainted with Sherborne's townhouse.
In my youth, I remember riding horses up this road from St. Hall, where old man Proverbs lived, all up through what is now the Pine Tension, all up into Sugarcane. And there was a lovely big house here. I used to pass it. But subsequently, I discovered from my mother, because my father and mother bought this house from Mr. Manning, Harry Manning, the realtor's grandfather. And when that happened, I discovered from my mother that quite a way back, her family had owned it. Now, I can't tell you when, but I can tell you that downstairs, where my son lives, there is a desk, which is definitely antique, which was made from a mahogany tree that was cut down at Sherborne at that stage of life. Then the old man Manning, when he bought this, everything around here was sugarcane. This was a dwelling house, and the piece opposite had to stay open so the people had a beautiful view of the valley. It was apparently a lovely old family home with a massive trees. For example, you all have a teak tree over there. Teak is a very hard wood. They had, as far as I can remember, obviously had Pride of India, mahogany, and I have always understood that there was a fantastic water well. I believe it's well over nearly 400 foot deep. But I've always heard my parents' generation say that the water that came out of that, apart from some lime, was the purest water you could drink. So that basically is the story of Sherborne as I know it.
Now, in 1962, Government bought the house, 7-acre property, and this was the era of the Federation. As you know, Federation started in the late 1950s. In 1961, Jamaica pulled out of the West Indies Federation. Eric Williams in Trinidad said 1 from 10 leaves nothing, and he pulled out too. So we started with 10 countries, and suddenly we only had 8. And Barbados, small Barbados, but in terms of its leadership and its importance, took on the center stage, the center role in leading and guiding what we now call the Little 8. And government, having taken over the ownership of Sherborne House, decided that the house would become the focal point of the Little 8, the focal point of that little federation that was about to germinate, about to flourish. So, for example, in the 1960s, you have the Council of Regional Ministers having their meetings here in the 1960s. So people are journeying from St. Kitts and journeying from Antigua and coming here to have their meetings. It's important to also recognize that in May 1965, Harold Barra took a decision that he too would leave the confines of the Little 8 and sue for independence as a unitary state. It is said that Harold Barra walked out of the meeting here at Sherborne, that the meeting ended in chaos. So let us go forward a little bit. The government owns Sherborne House. The Little 8 is dissolved. What happens to the building? The Barbados Community College was formed around 1969. And some of the college students, before we had the lovely building there at the Erie, some of the college students had their classes here at Sherborne House. And according to Professor Woodville Marshall, they were also making plans to send some of the UWI students up here as well. But that did not happen because the UWI, the main campus, was ready by 1967. But the community college students, they were able to come here and have their education. And that really introduces the man behind this center, Lloyd Erskine Sandiford, Sir Lloyd. He taught me at the community college. He was the brainchild as the Minister of Education, first of all, and then the Prime Minister of this building we now call the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Center. So Barra wins the election in 1986. He dies a year later. Lloyd Erskine Sandiford takes over. He becomes the Prime Minister.
I am aware that the demands of government will be no less onerous than they have been before the end of May.
The next year, 1988, the old Sherborne House is taken down. And Sandiford turns the soil here in 1988 to kickstart what he wanted to be, first, a center for examinations and also a conference center. And of course, that did not go well with certain political parties. So you have the criticism. Now, this project was supposed to cost about $20 million back in 1988. So 1989 comes around, 1990, 1991. And of course, this is the time when the Prime Minister is under pressure because the economy is in trouble. He has to go to the IMF, and you have an IMF program, but you're still pursuing a building like this, a building that will cost you over $20 million. And that caused a problem because people did not see the wisdom of Sir Lloyd pursuing that project. And this building became, as you know, a political football. It was the center for derision, what we call in Barbados political cussing, and all sorts of things. So they call the building a museum of madness. They called it Sandyford's folly. They called it financial folly, a waste of money. But I want to suggest, however, that that has always been Barbados's political trajectory. In 1956, when the building, which we now call government headquarters, was being built, and built by Grantley Adams, who was the premier then. You know what they called it? Adams Castle. In derision, of course, because how dare this man seek to build this large building in 1956, where people were living in small huts and small child houses. You know, and for some people, it didn't sit well with what other people were doing. In the 1980s as well, when the Tom Adams government came up with this idea to build a central bank, tremendous criticism from the Democratic Labour Party. And as a matter of fact, when the central bank was supposed to be open, Prime Minister Barrow did not go to open that bank. Did not go to open the building. Somebody else went. So you can see the opposition happening. And of course, it happened as well with this building. But I was reading an interview done in 1989, I think it was, printed in the Nation newspaper, where Prime Minister Sandyford was saying, look, crop over is a major event on our calendar. It is an event that brings in foreign exchange. It is an event where we have the finals and the semifinals, but there are not a lot of covered spaces, he says, a lot of covered spaces to have these calypso competitions. So that he was also saying that in addition to being an exam center, that it would become a cultural hub for these competitions, a venue that can hold over 1,000 people.
It will serve as a center for the visual and performing arts and will be the home of the National Orchestra, which is to be developed here in Barbados. It will serve as a center where conferences and conventions may be held without prejudice to the construction of a custom-designed conference center at some other site. It will serve as a hospitality center for government. It will serve as a center where bodies of students may take their examinations and where schools may hold graduation ceremonies.
The reason for the venue is changing all the time, okay? And you can't be too hard on the Prime Minister, because sometimes when you start something, you don't know where it will go. You don't know where it will end up. But of course, he had the vision that Barbados, an independent country, and a country that depends on tourism, must have a conference center for two reasons. One, there are a lot of people who come to Barbados for conferences. So there's a good, intricate link between conferences and tourism. So people who travel for conferences can have their conference in one area. And this center has many rooms and all the equipment in the world to handle these conferences. So he was thinking about conferences. He was thinking about tourism. Because if you don't have a venue, people are not going to come. Okay? But he was also thinking about culture. How could he facilitate culture? Facilitate those calypsonians. Facilitate the calypso competition. So therefore, in the 1980s, when this venue was conceptualized, we can make the point, therefore, that Prime Minister Sandiford was unsung. He understood what the nation wanted, and he sought to continue to find the resources to ensure that the center would be completed. Of course, in 1993, Prime Minister Sandiford had gone ahead to invite the world to Barbados, that conference on small island developing states. That's the big world conference that came here in 1994.
In 92, at the Rio conference, that's where the approval was given for there to be a global conference on SIDS. It was very new. And then in 93, Barbados officially offered to host the conference. So here we are offering to host a conference, a full UN global conference with nowhere to put it. That was an act of great courage on the part of then Prime Minister Sandiford. But because Sherburne was here and it was vested in the Ministry of Education and it was supposed to be constructed, that just expedited everything. The UN has very, very strict requirements. When you sign up to have a UN conference, you actually have to sign what they call a host country agreement. You know, a legal document saying what you will provide and what they will bring to the conference. And so because of this, the specifications for outfitting the conference center were based on UN and international standards.
The conference center was pretty much driven by what that SIDS conference required. It started 1986, and the design was completed around mid-1987, and that required a lot more than just a conference room. All of the breakout rooms and associated facility for the conference.
Never before has a country of this size hosted such a United Nations conference. It meant a huge task in a relatively short time to get all the facilities ready. The rapid transformation of the structure that is the Sherburne Center was easily visible from the outside. What was not was the painstaking and very technical task of readying the technical facilities, a job entrusted to the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. It meant providing sophisticated media facilities to the exact requirements of a team of UN experts, headed by Martin Bunnell.
CBC has become, therefore, the world pool for television. Everything coming out of this conference, be it a plenary meeting in this hall or a press conference or anything else, it'll come from CBC cameras and CBC technicians, CBC producers. United Nations will have a news producer and we will oversee, as it were, the whole coverage. But it is indeed CBC that will be doing all the work.
Even some of those most closely involved were wondering whether this mammoth task could have been completed on time.
I believe that CBC has been absolutely wonderful in doing that. And I would say it's not only in terms of the television equipment, it's also for the whole center as a whole. I was here in November of last year and February this year, and frankly, we were a little bit concerned whether or not the building was going to be finished, never mind whether or not there was going to be television and radio coverage in the building. But we are very pleased the way it is looking right now.
We also then learned that we needed simultaneous translation, which is another layer of complexity, in that you then had to provide services to each desk from the interpretation booths. You also needed a press room, and all of those links from the interpretation had to go back to the press room, and the backup facility for the conference. So that put a completely different spin on the architecture per se of the building. So it was very heavily engineered, both electronically, electrically, and structurally. The other interesting thing was, because it was a large span building, the structure had to be pretty specific. I didn't mention exhibition center, but exhibition is part of conference, because once you have conference, you have the chance of doing exhibitions as well. So when we got the brief, and given the size of the building, we knew that we're not going to be doing a CITES conference every Tuesday. So the building had to be fairly flexible. So we designed for exhibition space. So if they wanted to do a car show, cars could drive into the conference room. We had a design where you can break up the spaces into smaller spaces so that the main conference room could be divided into two unequal spaces, and the other conference room, which was formerly labeled examination center, that could be divided into three. And since then it has expanded and changed and so on.
Had we not had CITES 94, I don't know if we would have had this conference center. It went down to the wire. It went down to the wire. The day before, they were paving the car park. And those beautiful palm trees you see in the circle, they were brought in pretty much that size and planted a couple days before the opening of the conference.
There was a rush to get this conference center finished. And the evidence suggests that they brought in Chinese labor. Yes, they brought in Chinese labor, and I have photographs of Chinese workers working at that site to my left, and they're working night and day, 24/7, ensuring that this thing is done. And the opposition is saying, no, why not call off the conference? Because we're not ready for that. Of course, Prime Minister Sandiford continued and ensured that the center was ready for the reception of this conference.
Sherburne Center has been host to two major conferences: the prestigious UN Global Conference on the Sustainable Development of Small Island Developing States in April, and the 15th CARICOM Heads of Government Summit in July. After such an impressive beginning, it was officially opened over the weekend by Prime Minister Erskine Sandiford. Prime Minister Sandiford says the 2 Mile Hill complex has an excellent future in convention tourism. He noted that this new thrust has already met with resounding success at other such facilities across the island.
In 1991, many of the large hotels here which house conference facilities reported a sizable number of bookings from overseas clients for conferences. Marriott Sam Lords, Grand Barbados Beach Resort and Cunard Paradise Village and Beach Club all confirmed that there were significant interest from small non-governmental and professional organizations and business associations for the convening of meetings in Barbados.
That's the start that he wanted, because it proved that a small independent country like Barbados could host the world. And I think that is the significance of what we have today. So as Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Center celebrates its 30th anniversary, it is celebrating the fact that the center has already hosted the world and will continue to host the world.
And that is the symbol of the center's success in bridging gaps, forging dialogue and reinforcing the relevance of intellectual contribution of small island developing states. Well, the early history of this site and that of the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Center has finally been crystallized in the audiovisual format, and it is now part of the intangible heritage not only of Barbados but of the world. The daily life, its magic and energy, and how it continues to fulfill the dream of its founding father will be presented in another installment. This has been a pillar of progress, the story of the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Center here in Barbados. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time.